I stood in the dimly lit room, the air thick with the scent of lilies and sorrow. The wake of Harold, my father-in-law, was more a display of pretense than a tribute to his life. My husband Alex clasped my hand tightly, his eyes a well of unshed tears. Vivian, Alex's mother, approached us with a thinly veiled sneer. "Elaine, Alex," she began, her voice dripping with feigned sympathy. "This is a family matter. Outsiders like Elaine should keep their distance." I felt a sting in her words. 3 years of marriage to Alex, and still I was an outsider. Greg and Nora, Alex's siblings, stood behind Vivian, their expressions echoing her disdain. "What are you saying, Mother?" Alex's voice trembled. "Elaine is family." "Family?" Vivian scoffed. "A family doesn't scheme for inheritance. We all know Harold left behind a fortune. 2 million, wasn't it?" I bit back my anger. We never cared about the money. It was always about Harold, his kind smile, his gentle words of encouragement. "Money? That's all you care about?" Alex's words were barely a whisper, but they cut through the tension like a knife. Greg chimed in, his tone laced with contempt. "Come on, Alex. Don't play the saint. We all know why she's here." Nora added with a smirk. "Yeah. Heard how cozy Elaine was getting with Dad. Planning to seduce your way to the inheritance?" Their accusations were like slaps to my face. Tears welled up, but I fought them back. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. "Enough!" Alex's outburst silenced the room. "We don't want your money. All we wanted was to say goodbye to a man we loved." Vivian's eyes narrowed, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "Goodbye to a man you loved? Elaine, dear, were you in love with my husband?" The room spun. Their cruel words, their unjust accusations, it was unbearable. I turned to Alex, my heart breaking for him. His family's true colors were laid bare, their greed and malice exposed. "Let's leave, Alex," I whispered, pulling him away. "We don't belong here." As we walked away, Vivian's mocking voice followed us. "Run away, Elaine. Remember, outsiders have no place here." Outside, the cold night air felt like a balm. Alex wrapped his arm around me, his body trembling with suppressed sobs. "I'm so sorry, Elaine," he muttered. "I never wanted you to be hurt like this." I hugged him, feeling his pain, our shared grief. "It's not your fault, Alex. We did everything for Harold, not for them." We stood there, under the starless sky, united in our sorrow and betrayal. The pain of loss was deep, but deeper still was the wound inflicted by his own family. As we drove back home, a silent resolve settled between us. We would not let Vivian and her children's venom taint our memories of Harold. We would find a way to honor him, away from the shadows of greed and lies. The chapter closes as Elaine and Alex leave the wake, their hearts heavy, but determined to seek justice in their own way, setting the stage for the unfolding drama and revenge. The clock in our living room struck midnight as Alex and I sat in silence, the events of the wake replaying in our minds. I could see the hurt in Alex's eyes, a pain that went deeper than tonight's insults. "Remember when we first met, Elaine?" Alex's voice broke the silence. "At that college art show. You were so passionate about your photography." I smiled, recalling our simpler days. "And you lost in your sketches. We were worlds apart from all this," I gestured vaguely, encompassing the current turmoil. Alex leaned back, his gaze distant. "I never told you the whole story about my family, did I? About why I was always so distant from them." I reached for his hand, encouraging him to continue. This was a story I knew only in fragments. My mother, Vivian, always favored Greg and Nora. They could do no wrong in her eyes. Alex began, his voice laced with a bitterness I rarely heard from him. "I was always the afterthought, the mistake." I squeezed his hand, feeling his old wounds reopen. "When I was a kid, Vivian never came to my school events. Greg and Nora got all the new clothes, the latest gadgets. I got their hand-me-downs if I was lucky." His words painted a picture of neglect, of a childhood shadowed by the constant reminder that he was less valued. "Despite all that, Dad, Harold was different. He tried, in his own way. He wasn't around much, but he made sure to be there when it mattered. He was the one who encouraged me to pursue art." I nodded, understanding the depth of his bond with Harold, despite the latter's limited presence. "When it was time for university, Vivian told me to get a job. No money for education," she said. "I managed with scholarships and loans. But it was never about the money, Elaine. It was about being seen, being acknowledged." His story revealed not just neglect, but a deep-seated desire for acceptance, something his family never gave him. When we decided to get married, I saw how they treated you. The snide comments, the disrespect. It hurt, Elaine, but I thought we could stay away, build our own world. I remembered those early encounters, the thinly veiled jabs, the dismissal of our relationship. It was clear now, this disdain wasn't new. It was a pattern long established in Alex's life. But Harold's illness changed everything, Alex continued. We couldn't just stand by. And you, Elaine, you were there for him more than anyone. A tear slipped down my cheek as I remembered Harold's grateful smiles, his warm thanks every time we visited. They think we're after the money, Alex said, his voice hardening. But they're the ones obsessed with it. They never cared for Dad, only for what he had. I nodded, feeling a surge of anger. Their greed, their cruel accusations, it was all a reflection of their own twisted desires. We'll find a way to set this right, Alex, I said firmly. For Harold, for us, we won't let them tarnish his memory. Alex looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of pain and determination. We'll do it together, Elaine. We'll make sure they get what they deserve. As we sat there, united in our resolve, the path ahead was clear. We would fight back, not with their weapons of greed and deceit, but with the truth and the strength of our bond. The sterile smell of the hospital lingered in the air as Alex and I walked through the quiet corridors. Each step felt heavy, a reminder of the countless times we had made this journey to visit Harold. As we entered his room, the sight of Harold lying frail and pale on the hospital bed never failed to stir a deep sadness in me. Despite his condition, his eyes lit up when he saw us. Elaine, Alex, my dear ones. Harold's voice was weak but filled with warmth. We approached his bedside, and I took his hand gently, noticing how it trembled slightly. "How are you feeling today, Dad?" Alex asked, concern etching his features. "Just being here with you both is a comfort," Harold replied, squeezing my hand. I couldn't help but think of Vivian, Greg, and Nora. Their absence in these crucial moments spoke volumes of their indifference. "Dad, we brought you some of your favorite music," I said, trying to bring some cheer into the room. "Let's listen together." As the soft melodies filled the room, I saw a tear roll down Harold's cheek. It was moments like these that made me realize the depth of his loneliness, exacerbated by his family's neglect. The door suddenly burst open, and in came Vivian, Greg, and Nora, their arrival like a storm disrupting the calm. "Harold, we're here!" "Oh, how terrible you look!" Vivian exclaimed, her tone lacking genuine concern. I felt Harold's grip on my hand tighten, a silent plea for strength. "Mother, we were just spending some quiet time with Dad," Alex said, his voice strained. Greg scoffed, looking around the room with disinterest. "Quiet time? More like making sure he remembers you in his will." Nora joined in, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Elaine, still playing the devoted daughter-in-law, hoping to get a bigger piece of the pie?" Their words were like daggers, but I remained composed, not wanting to upset Harold. "We're here because we care for Dad, not for his money," I said firmly, meeting their accusing eyes. Vivian snorted. "Care? You're nothing but gold diggers. Harold, don't trust them." Harold, who had been silent, finally spoke. "Enough. Elaine and Alex have been my only comfort in these trying times. They are my family." His declaration was a blow to Vivian and her children. Their faces contorted in anger and disbelief. "You'll regret this, Harold," Vivian hissed, storming out of the room with Greg and Nora following her. Once they were gone, a heavy silence fell. Harold looked exhausted, the encounter having drained his remaining strength. "Elaine, Alex, I'm sorry you have to endure this," Harold whispered. "We're here for you, Dad, always," Alex replied, his voice filled with unwavering loyalty. As we left the hospital that evening, a resolute anger settled in my heart. Vivian and her children's greed and cruelty knew no bounds, but Alex and I were determined to stand against them, to protect Harold and honor his wishes. The injustice inflicted upon us, upon Harold, would not go unanswered. We were ready to fight back, to ensure that the true colors of our adversaries were brought to light. The days following Harold's funeral were a blur of grief and disbelief. Alex and I tried to find solace in each other, but the shadow of his family's callousness loomed over us. It was on a bleak Tuesday morning when the unexpected happened. A knock at our door revealed a stern-looking man in a suit, introducing himself as Mr. Simmons, Harold's attorney. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, I'm here regarding Harold's last will and testament," Mr. Simmons announced, his tone formal yet sympathetic. Alex and I exchanged a look of surprise. We were unaware Harold had made a will. "Please come in," I said, leading him to the living room. As Mr. Simmons unfolded the documents, the anticipation in the room was palpable. Harold made it clear in his will that his entire estate, including the $2 million inheritance, is to be left to you, Alex, and Elaine, Mr. Simmons stated. The revelation hit us like a bolt of lightning. All this time, Harold had planned to leave everything to us. "But why us?" Alex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Harold felt that you two were the only ones who genuinely cared for him in his final years. He was deeply hurt by the rest of the family's indifference and greed, Mr. Simmons explained. The truth of Harold's feelings towards his family, now laid bare, was both a validation and a burden. We were honored by his trust, yet saddened by the extent of his loneliness and pain. "What about Vivian, Greg, and Nora?" I asked, my mind racing with the implications of this revelation. Harold explicitly disinherited them. "They are not to receive anything from the estate," Mr. Simmons replied, his tone indicating finality. I could almost hear Vivian's outraged scream, Greg's indignant protests, Nora's incredulous gasps. The news would hit them like a tidal wave, shattering their illusions of entitlement. "This will undoubtedly cause a stir," Alex said, a hint of worry in his eyes. "Yes, but Harold's wishes are legally binding. I will handle any disputes that may arise," Mr. Simmons assured us, his confidence somewhat easing our concerns. After Mr. Simmons left, Alex and I sat in silence, absorbing the gravity of the situation. Harold had entrusted us with his legacy, a clear message to his family that their behavior was inexcusable. The sense of justice was bittersweet. While we felt vindicated, it pained us to think of Harold's final days clouded by such decisions. "We need to prepare, Elaine," Alex said, determination in his voice. "Vivian and her children won't take this lightly. We must stand our ground." I nodded, feeling a mix of resolve and apprehension. "We'll do this together for Harold," I said, my voice steady. As we braced ourselves for the inevitable storm, I couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning. The revelation of Harold's will was not just a testament to his love for us, but also a catalyst for the impending battle with his family. The confrontation was inevitable. Just days after learning of Harold's will, Vivian, Greg, and Nora appeared at our doorstep, their faces twisted in anger and disbelief. "You can't possibly think you're keeping all of Harold's money," Vivian spat as soon as we opened the door. Her words were like venom, but Alex and I stood firm, united in our resolve. "Harold made his wishes clear," Alex said calmly. "He left everything to us because we were the only ones who truly cared for him." Greg stepped forward, his eyes burning with rage. "You manipulated him. This is fraud." I felt a surge of anger at their accusations. "Manipulating? That's rich coming from you. You barely visited him, and now you claim rights to his estate?" Nora's voice was shrill with fury. "We're his real family, not some gold-digging wife and the son he barely tolerated." The cruelty in her words stung, but I refused to let it show. "That's where you're wrong," I countered. "Family isn't just about blood, it's about who's there in times of need, and you were all conspicuously absent." Vivian's face contorted in a mix of anger and desperation. "You can't do this to us. We deserve that inheritance." "It's not about what you think you deserve," Alex said, his voice steady. "It's about honoring Dad's wishes. He saw through your greed and selfishness." "You'll regret this," Greg threatened, stepping closer. "We won't let you get away with stealing our inheritance." I felt Alex's hand tighten around mine, a silent pledge of support. "This isn't theft, it's justice," I declared, meeting their hostile gazes head-on. "You neglected Harold, and now you're paying the price." Vivian's expression shifted to one of begrudging realization. "So, this is how it is. You've turned him against us, and now you're taking everything." "No, Vivian," Alex said, a hint of sadness in his voice. "You did this to yourselves. Your actions, your choices led to this moment." The air was thick with tension, the unsaid words hanging heavy between us. "Leave, now," I said firmly. "You have no claim here, not anymore." With one last glare, Vivian, Greg, and Nora turned and left, their departure leaving a trail of bitterness and resentment. Closing the door behind them, Alex and I let out a collective sigh. The battle lines were drawn, the fight for justice was just beginning. But we were ready, armed with the truth and the strength of our conviction. "We did the right thing, Elaine," Alex said, wrapping his arm around me. I nodded, feeling a sense of righteous vindication mixed with sorrow. We did for Harold. As we stood in the silence of our home, we knew this was far from over. But whatever lay ahead, we would face it together, standing tall against the greed and deceit that sought to overshadow Harold's final wishes. The aftermath of the confrontation left a charged atmosphere in our home. Alex and I knew this was just the beginning of a longer battle against Vivian, Greg, and Nora's greed. We were having dinner when the phone rang. Alex answered, and I could immediately tell from his tone that it was them again. "You can't possibly think we'll just walk away from this," Vivian's voice, shrill and agitated, echoed from the speaker. Alex put her on speakerphone, and I braced myself for another round of accusations. "We've seen lawyers, Alex. They say we have a case. You'll be hearing from us," Greg's voice threatened. I exchanged a look with Alex. "Let them try," I whispered. Alex spoke into the phone, his voice firm. "You heard, Mr. Simmons. Dad's will is clear and legally binding. You were disinherited for a reason." "You think you're so smart, but we'll see who gets the last laugh," Nora chimed in, her voice dripping with malice. "It's not about winning or losing," I said, my voice steady as I took the phone from Alex. "It's about what's right. Harold knew the truth about all of you." There was a pause, and then Vivian's voice returned, colder and more calculating. "You think you know everything, Elaine? We're his blood. That has to count for something." "It counted for nothing when you ignored him in his final years," I countered. "You'll regret this. We won't let you get away with it." Greg's voice was a mix of anger and desperation. "As far as we're concerned, this matter is closed," Alex said, ending the call. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation heavy on our shoulders. "They won't give up easily," I said, more to myself than Alex. "But we have the truth on our side," Alex replied, reaching for my hand. "Dad wanted us to have this. We'll honor his wishes, no matter what they throw at us." I nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Harold's final act had been one of love and trust towards us, and we would defend it with everything we had. Over the next few days, we prepared for the legal battle that loomed ahead. We gathered documents, spoke to Mr. Simmons, and fortified ourselves for the fight. Then, one evening, as we reviewed our strategy, the doorbell rang. Standing on our doorstep were Vivian, Greg, and Nora, their faces a mix of anger and defeat. "We want to talk," Vivian said, her voice lacking its usual confidence. "We have nothing to discuss," Alex replied, his stance unwavering. "Just hear us out," Nora pleaded, a rare note of sincerity in her voice. Reluctantly, we let them in. They sat across from us, their body language deflated. "We've been to several lawyers. They all say the same thing. The will is ironclad," Vivian admitted, her eyes avoiding ours. "So what do you want?" I asked, my tone cautious. We're sorry," Greg said, the words seeming to pain him. "We were wrong about Harold, about you." I looked at Alex, seeing the skepticism in his eyes mirrored in mine. "Sorry doesn't change what you did, what you said," Alex said coldly. "We know," Nora added, her voice quivering, "but we're family. Can't we find a way to move past this?" Alex and I exchanged a look, the decision clear between us. "There's no moving past this," I said firmly. "You made your choice, and now you have to live with it." They left soon after, their departure marked by a heavy silence. Alex and I sat back down, the finality of the situation sinking in. "We did the right thing," Alex said after a moment, his voice resolute. "We did," I agreed, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. "For Harold and for us." The battle was over, but the scars remained. We had stood our ground, defended Harold's legacy, and in doing so, had closed the door on a part of our lives that was filled with greed and betrayal. Months had passed since we had last seen Vivian, Greg, and Nora. The legal battle, as predicted, never materialized. Their threats had been nothing but hollow words, a final attempt to intimidate us. One evening, as Alex and I sat on our porch, enjoying the peaceful twilight, he broke the silence with a reflective tone. "Do you ever think about them?" he asked, gazing into the distance. "I try not to," I admitted. "But sometimes I wonder if they ever understood the pain they caused, not just to us, but to Harold." Alex nodded, a hint of sorrow in his eyes. "I doubt it. Their greed blinded them to everything else." The conversation drifted to other topics, but a part of my mind remained on that bitter family conflict. It was a chapter of our lives that had closed, but its echoes still lingered. A few days later, we received news that served as a stark reminder of the consequences of their actions. Through a mutual acquaintance, we learned of their downfall. Greg's business, already struggling, had collapsed under mounting debts. Nora, caught in her web of lies and deceit, faced a bitter divorce. And Vivian, abandoned by her children in her time of need, was left to grapple with her loneliness and remorse. Hearing of their misfortunes didn't bring us joy. There was no satisfaction in seeing them suffer, only a deep sense of pity and a reminder of the destructive power of greed. As we moved on with our lives, Alex and I made a conscious decision to focus on the positive. We invested Harold's inheritance wisely, ensuring his legacy would continue to support causes he believed in. We also started a small foundation in his name to help those in need, a fitting tribute to a man who had shown us so much kindness. Life had a way of coming full circle. A year after Harold's passing, we welcomed a new addition to our family, a baby boy we named Ethan. Holding him in my arms, I felt an overwhelming sense of love and hope. He was a new beginning, a chance to build a legacy of love and kindness, far removed from the shadows of greed and betrayal. As Ethan grew, we often told him stories of his grandfather Harold, ensuring his memory lived on in the heart of our family. We wanted Ethan to know the values Harold stood for: kindness, compassion, and integrity. Sitting on the porch one evening, watching Ethan play in the garden, Alex put his arm around me. "We made it through the storm," he said, a note of contentment in his voice. "We did," I replied, leaning into him. "And we built something beautiful from it." The journey had been fraught with pain and conflict, but it had led us to a place of peace and understanding. We had turned the bitterness of the past into a future filled with love and hope. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over our home, I realized that this was what Harold had wanted for us: a life of happiness, free from the toxic grasp of greed. And in that moment, I knew we had truly honored his legacy.